We're thrilled to have welcomed our first grandbaby recently. But growing this precious human hasn't been easy on our daughter. The unrelenting pregnancy fatigue really took it out of her.
One thing that helped was keeping her fluids up, and she loved Rehydrate. Rehydrate is an essential electrolyte drink made by some great guys right here in Brizzy. It's safe during pregnancy and breastfeeding and is like a magical little energy and hydration boost for mum and bub.
If you're growing a little human or are just feeling a little run down, grab some at Coles today.
There's no way to be a parent without being worried, or at least I haven't figured that out yet. But I feel like these new extravagant worries are superimposed on us by a culture.
This is the Parenting in Perspective podcast. It's a Happy Families podcast. Thanks so much for being a part of these in-depth podcast discussions. My name's Dr. Justin Coulson. I'm a dad to 6 kids and the author of 6 books about raising happy families. And on this episode, we're having a conversation with Lenore Skenazy. She's the president of Let Grow, a not-for-profit organisation that promotes childhood independence and resilience, and also the founder of the Free Range Kids movement. Lenore was also branded, quite famously, the world's worst mum. Let's start at the peak Lenore Skenazy moment where you've got a 9-year-old son. It's probably, what was it, about 10 or 12 years ago now?
Oh my God, he's 22. So.
Oh, wow. Okay, so, yep. So you've got a 9-year-old son and you say, mate, why don't you catch the subway home?
No, that's not what I say. First of all, we don't say mate. But more importantly, our son was asking us if we would take him someplace he'd never been before and let him find his own way home on the subway, which is how we get around in New York City all the time. And this was not something that our older son had asked us when he was 9. So it was something that we really had to think about, my husband and I, before we said yes. But then finally we did say, okay, we'll do this. We'll let you take the subway by yourself.
It's kind of independent, really, isn't it? 9-year-olds aren't usually saying, give me a challenge. Let's just drop me somewhere in the city and let me try to get home. So has he always been an independent-minded kind of kid?
I would say he is, but I think that we're sort of right and wrong on whether kids have always or don't ask this kind of thing. I think that a generation or two before this, it wouldn't have been a conversation because it would have happened naturally. You know, kids would have been either getting on their bikes if they were in the suburbs or riding the bus or subway if they were in the city, you know, to get to a music lesson, to get to school, to get to grandma's house, to get to an empty lot and start a baseball game and hang out there all day. And so even the fact that he had to ask, as opposed to this just being a normal thing that kids just do on their own, is indicative of it being, you know, a more sort of mother may I kind of era than it was before. So yeah, he was asking and that was unusual, but I don't think his independence would have been unusual in any other generation.
When you had the conversation with your husband and then decided that, we're comfortable with this, we'll give it a go, we'll take you into the city and we'll go home and then we'll see you at home in a couple of hours, hopefully. What were you...
That's a bigger, you're making it into a bigger deal because we were in the city, right? We lived in Manhattan at the time and we were sending him, we just took the subway up to this beautiful fancy department store, which is why it was someplace he had never been before because we don't usually shop there. And then all he had to do was come back down on the subway about 4 or 5 stops. And then we don't live right near there. So he had to take another little bus across town. Altogether, it might have taken an hour, if that.
When you went through this conversation and actually got to the point where you're like, okay, let's do this, what reservations did you have? At what point were you thinking, are we crazy? Is this normal? A generation ago, it would have been fine, but it's a different world now. What are we thinking? What sort of concerns did you have?
Beforehand, we had the concern that we wanted to make sure that he knew what he was doing. And so even though we are on the subways all the time, you know how some kids love certain things, like there are kids who love cars or dolls or whatever. He loved the subway. He loves, he loved public transportation. But we wanted to make sure he understood that you're reading the map and the green line, which is the line that he was going to have to take. That's the 4, 5, and 6 train for anybody who's been to New York City, that was the train you would have to take. And, this is the stop you get off on. And then, of course, we're always on that extremely slow bus. So he knew that he would have to wait for the bus at the bus stop. I don't recall telling him this that time, but I've always told my kids that you can talk to strangers. You can't go off with strangers. So if you need help from somebody, certainly you can ask a question of somebody, but you can't get into somebody's car. You can't go off with somebody. And other than that, we prepared him with a couple of things. We gave him a subway map, $20 just in case he needed something went really terribly wrong and he needed to take a cab or something. Quarters, because even 12 years ago, there were still some payphones in the subway, and a Metro card, which is the card that you slide through the entryway to get into the trains to pay your fare. And so I'd say that we didn't think we were crazy because we were preparing him. And because it wasn't something that he was saying, no, Mom, I don't want to do this. This was his idea and something that we had all discussed and decided he was ready for. I'm a reporter by trade. I spent years and years at the New York Daily News, which is, if you've seen the Superman movies, it's actually, they call it the Daily Planet, but they shoot the movies at the Daily News, which is where I worked. And so as a tabloid reporter, I was steeped in the city. I went everywhere on stories hither and yon. And I had a very, I'd say, realistic view of the city based on being very much part of it. And that's very different from, I think, the way the story obviously resonated around the world, because if you watch, TV shows, especially Law and Order, set in New York City, you think there's a murder every second, and they're always children, and they're always raped beforehand, and they're always cut into pieces. And in fact, the crime rate right now is crazy because of COVID. But since the 90s, the crime rate has been going down, 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 down. So given all that, I didn't think we were crazy. And in fact, there are a lot of things that I wouldn't let my 9-year-old do, and that I'm sorry that my 22-year-old does. I absolutely am terrified of cars, but I guess he has to drive. But taking the subway did not strike me as crazy.
Every now and again, I'll send my kids off to play in the park, or I'll tell them to go for a walk around the block or jump on their bikes and ride to school or whatever it might be. And as they leave the driveway, my heart goes with them. And I think to myself, I know what the crime statistics are loosely. I know that I live in a pretty safe area. I know all of these things, but there's this part of me that just seizes up and thinks, what have you just done? You've sent the 10-year-old on a bike ride with a 12-year-old. What's going to happen now? It's a challenging thing. And then, maybe the 6-year-old says, can I go too? And I think to myself, well, can I send a 6-year-old in the care of a 10 and a 12-year-old? And at this point, the answer is no, because she's 6. But it's a really, really, really big challenge to kind of encounter and work through these things, even when you know rationally that it should be just fine.
Well, I have to say that this weekend, my kids were visiting me, and they're now 22 and 24. And when they were driving home together, I was like, both my kids are in a car together. Oh no, which is just normal. But here's what we're talking about. You're saying, is it rational or irrational to worry this way, to calculate the odds as we're doing? I'd say that there's no way to be a parent without being worried, or at least I haven't figured that out yet. But what I think is different from about our generation, and actually I'm older than you, so about your generation, and then our parents or grandparents or anybody before that, is that when my mom let me walk to school, and it was age 5, and she didn't do it because she was a free range mom or a crazy person. She was doing it because everybody let their kids walk to school at age 5 in the suburb where I was growing up outside of Chicago. She was a nervous mom. She was a regular mom. But back then you let kids do that. And when you let the children go, you weren't sitting there going, oh my God, I hope she makes it. It's going to be about a 6-minute walk. And she's only 5 and she's so small and the world is such a terrible place. And if anything terrible happens to her, I couldn't live with myself. Forget it. I'm going to go get her and drive her myself. And that simply wasn't the catechism back then. You didn't have to go through what about, and then name, what about, Elizabeth Smart? What about, Maddie McCann? You weren't thinking that a normal mom, a normal good mom, should be thinking about the murder of their child every time the child was out of their sight, or the death on the bike, on the walk, so that is new. And it feels normal because it is normal to worry. But I feel like these new extravagant worries are superimposed on us by a culture that I've seen up close, in part because of the question that was asked of me. I let my son ride the subway. Okay, most interviewers at the very beginning, and I'd say the very beginning for the first 4 years, I would say, were saying, okay, he had a good time. You're proud. He's elated. He feels grown up. Great. That's all great. But what if he hadn't come home? Framing it in the negative, I never had a good answer. How would I have felt? Funny you should ask. I'd feel great because I don't have to feed another kid. I mean, there was like no normal answer that you could give to that question other than this is how I'd feel. And in a way, this is what they were trying to make me feel. They were trying to take a positive story and turn it back into the story that television loves, which is he never came home. So the fact that he did come home, okay, let's ignore that and think about how terrible a mom she would have been if that had happened. And why wasn't she thinking that way? You're always supposed to be thinking in this extremely dark, dystopian way about your kid if they're beyond your sight. And that's what's new. And I feel like it's superimposed by questions like that. When an interviewer would say, well, how would you have felt? It's like, you know how I feel. I would feel lower than hell. Okay. But why are we talking about it? Why can't we celebrate when a kid does something normal that I'd say, most 9-year-olds could do if they felt like it? Worry is normal. But us worrying when the kid goes around the block, worrying, I would say, even if a 6-year-old is with a 10 and a 12-year-old who love him or her and care about them, that's new.
What I'm interested in is this. You've been doing some work with letgrow.org with one of the best thinkers in the world of psychology, Jonathan Haidt. And
actually, two of the best thinkers in the world of psychology, Jonathan Haidt and also Peter Gray, Dr. Peter Gray.
Now you're just showing off.
Another genius, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I just want to talk about John at the moment because his research is what has fascinated me the most, because Peter really focuses on the play aspect of life, and John has always focused so much more on the social psychology and the data and trends. And what I'm really curious about is what, as you've worked as a trio, what have you discovered in the data? What's the data showing in terms of this? Well, is there a trend, or are we just at peak 2020 and everybody's, getting so excited about the outliers, the unusual stories?
First of all, I do think there's something. I'm happy you mentioned the outliers and the unusual stories, because I feel like they are driving so much of our regular life, based on the saddest, worst, most anomalous, unpredictable stories, that if there was some way we could get rid of the story of one horrible accident or one horrible crime or one horrible shooting, I think we would all be at a much better set point, rather than using those terrible outlying stories as the norm from which we decide how we should live our lives. But the thing that, Jonathan Haidt, is a big fan of free-range kids, and he's raising his free-range kids, and I feel great about that. But he came to me a couple of years ago, and his hypothesis was that young adults, and by young adults we mean college age and a little bit beyond, were becoming fragile. And as it turns out, Dr. Peter Gray had noticed this too, that I think it's great when kids go for, the psychological services they need. And believe me, I live in New York. I'm a Jew. I'm a woman. I've been through as much therapy as anybody could possibly have because of these demographics. So I love therapy. However, it seems like at this point on the college campuses, and I'm talking about before COVID, because COVID is just so weird, that the colleges could not keep up with the number of kids who were seeking therapy and who seemed to be falling apart, and not falling apart after a breakup with a girlfriend or a boyfriend or something very large, but often after a B, and not a B like a Z B, like a B minus, or after an argument with the roommate, after a mouse in the dorm. And John and Peter were thinking, where is this fragility coming from? Why do the kids think they need to talk to either a counselor, or they have to talk to their dean because they're so worried about their grades, or they're calling their parents as they walk across the campus because they feel afraid to walk without talking to somebody while they're crossing the campus? This seemed new, and it seemed sad. Here it is, this blossoming time of your life, and yet a lot of kids were very, very anxious and depressed. And if you're asking about the data are that anxiety and depression among young people has been going up for the last several decades. And I hate to talk about it, but so is suicide. So it's not just, choosing to call more things depressed, or kids saying I'm depressed because there's a certain social cachet to it. It really does seem to be weighing on the kids. And So John came to me and said, I think this is starting younger. You seem to be the only person, I'm not the only person, who is trying to fight the overprotection that seems to be undermining kids. And let's work together and start a nonprofit that tries to overthrow the overprotection that is not helping kids, it's hurting kids. And so I said, no, I didn't want to start a nonprofit. I'm a journalist by trade. I like just being a lone wolf on my free range track. But a couple of years later, he persuaded me. And also by then I'd found somebody who actually knows about how to start a business. And so together, the three of us, plus Daniel Schuckman, who used to be the chairman of FIRE, which fights for free speech on campus, also worrying that there was a trend on campus where kids were saying that if somebody came to speak whom they didn't like or whom they disagreed with, rather than saying, why'd they invite this jerk? Or rather than reading up on that person's work and then coming and raising your hand at, in the Q&A time and, offering a piercing critique and a question to boot. Instead, they were saying, don't let them come on campus. I'm not safe if this speaker is coming to campus. And we're not talking about a rabble-rousing, machete-wielding speaker. We're talking about a speaker with a difference of opinion or often in a different political party. And so Daniel was worried that free speech was going to die because if it seems like it's actually hurting somebody, actually physically harming someone, how could you fight for it? How can a president of a college say, no, we're going to have that person come speak anyway, if the students feel like that is literally putting them in danger? So there's this idea of the sort of through line through all this is seeing a normal situation that everybody has dealt with in the past, whether it's a speaker you don't like or a walk to get your cricket magazine. And instead of seeing it as just something that either is okay or maybe even good, it was all seen through the lens of risk and danger. And so we started Let Grow with the desire to start so young with kids, getting them used to being part of the world, being challenged, standing up for themselves, having fun, being curious, following their interests, organizing a game without some adult deciding whether you're in or out and who's on what team, just doing some of these age-old things that seem to be, since time immemorial, part of childhood, giving them back to children and making parents feel that it's a good idea, that it's not crazy dangerous, and that actually you're doing something that not only does Let Grow approve of it, but these extremely vaunted social psychologists and other moral psychologists think is good for your kids. So we wanted to re-normalize the idea of giving kids back some independence.
There are so many things that I want to pull out of there, and time is going to get the better of us because there's still so much that I want to talk to you about. Maybe I've just made 3 notes as I've listened to everything that you've said, and I'm going to ignore the rest of it, not because it's not brilliant to discuss, but simply because time won't allow us to discuss all of that. The first thing that I want to highlight is something that you prompted in my memory as you talk about the trends and the data. I've been looking into perfectionism recently, and my sense.
Very interesting, yeah.
My sense is that perfectionism is following the same trend and is probably linked here. The idea with perfectionism is that I either expect a lot of myself or I feel like everybody else expects a lot of me. And it seems that the most complex and debilitating form of perfectionism, there is another form as well, by the way, and that's when you expect perfection of those outside you. So there are 3 forms of it. But the one that seems to be most debilitating is the one where we have an expectation that everybody around us expects so much of us and we can't possibly live up to it. And what I'm hearing is, as I think about John and Greg Lukianoff's book, The Coddling of the American Mind, and I think about the things that you've just talked about, is there seems to be this desire on the part of parents to create a perfect world for their children, a world where their children don't have to take risks and always do feel safe. Because if we can create that Instagram-worthy perfect world, and I know that I guess I'm relying on tropes and stereotypes a little bit as I summarize a whole lot of things here. Parents feel like they can control everything to give their kids the best outcomes. And aligned with that, the data doesn't just show the points that you've made around safetyism, I guess, but the data also shows that what we would call autonomy supportive parenting, that is parenting along the lines of what you've described with your son when he caught that subway train as a 9-year-old. That is, you sit down and you put the scaffolding in, you do the pre-work, you make sure that they're going to be okay and say, all right, it's your life. Off you go. I'm with you.
Right. So
that's on the decline.
I just have to jump in. There's so much to say. First of all, you can never say you're going to be fine, because that is the idea of control. I mean, the illusion that we can control for every variable, I think it leads to bureaucracy.
Great pickup. Yes.
And I think it leads to extreme nervousness on the part of parents, because there's no acknowledgement that, like, we can't control everything. We aren't God. We think we are. We have the phones. We can track them. We can see who they texted. We can, there's cameras everywhere. But in fact, we're not in complete control. And, if you think you are, you will never be able to let go at all, because you will think if anything bad happens, there will be no grace.
So it's it's more about not saying you'll be fine. It's more about saying, I feel like we've done everything we can to help you to have a good experience. I hope you'll be fine. But if you won't, we'll do what we need to, or you'll do what you need to make it fine eventually.
Well, first of all, part of it is, yes, trusting that your kid can roll with some punches.
Yeah.
I mean, part of it is that we're told that the kids are fragile, so we treat them as fragile, and it becomes this sort of princess and the pea, exercise where we keep making things safer and better until they expect too much more. But back to perfectionism, you're mentioning it makes me want to actually research it more, because I think it is like a third almost disability that we are imposing upon kids. And I say this because there's this one 7th grade teacher I just love who did the Let Grow project, which is sending kids home with the homework assignment. You must do something on your own without your parents that you haven't done before. Walk the dog, make dinner, run an errand, babysit, whatever. She was talking about one of the reasons she decided to do the project with her class is that she'd never seen a group of kids, and this was a year ago, as nervous as the 7th grader she had. And one of the sort of ways she explained to me what was going on is she'll say, I'll say, okay, take out your paper and, put your name on it. We're going to have a quiz. And they'll be like, do we put our name in the right-hand side or the left-hand side? And it's like, the left-hand side.
Yeah, pen or pencil. Yeah.
Or just the last name. Do you need the date on it? And to me, that bespeaks perfectionism or a fear. And fear is at the bottom of it. It's like, if I do one thing wrong, if I get a bad grade, if I disappoint the teacher, if I look stupid, the thing that she kept saying, that the kids kept saying to her, is I don't want to get out of my comfort zone. And the comfort zone is extremely narrow, to the point where she said that one kid came to her class. It was actually an extra class at lunchtime, a little late. Kid didn't have time to get her lunch. So the teacher said, okay, just go get your lunch. And, when you come back, you'll just jump right in. And the kid said, by myself. And so that struck me as like, you've developed so little self-confidence that you don't think you can handle anything, whether it's, what if you put your name on the paper wrong? What if you're walking by yourself to the cafeteria and it's scary or lonely? This is your school. You're a 7th grader. You're 13 years old. In some countries you'd be dragooned into the army by then, which I also think is a bad idea. But to raise these kids. And so then she had them write down what they would like to do for their, what was their thing that they were hesitant to do, but they wanted to do for their Let Grow project. And the answers were, I want to walk my dog, but what if he gets off the leash? I want to go and run an errand, but the store is filled with strangers. I want to use a knife, but I'm afraid of cutting off my fingers. So everything was so terrifying to them. The simplest things, and parents have kept them from walking to school because it might be dangerous, and don't use the knife, you might hurt yourself, and I'll run the errand with you. You don't know this, you don't know where the stuff is in the store. You've never made change for yourself. You don't know how to talk to the cashier. Well, of course they don't know how to do any things if you've done them for them the whole time, and you've created the very ineptitude that you're worried about them having. And in the absence of doing anything on your own and succeeding, in the absence of taking that long walk and getting the Cricket magazine because you saved for it, you walked to it, it was too far, and you did it anyway, without that Jenga piece Kids are falling apart. And all I'm saying is, let's remember that there's no such thing as I want a zero risk childhood for my kid. It's like when you're taking away all that risk, you're raising the risk of depression, anxiety, perfectionism, despair, because all you've raised is a person who looks like a person, but there's nothing inside. It hasn't been knitted together by life. You have to take a step back for your kids to step up. That's it.
I love your passion. I'm thinking so many thoughts. Let me go back a quick step. You know why kids love kids' books? Because they're always about the kids. The parents, the parents have vanished. Where are the parents? The kids are living their lives and they're exploring the woods or they're climbing the trees. They're having their adventures and the
Patronus. Yes,
so much joy to be had when the parents aren't around. I've heard you talk about the difference between risk and risky.
Right. Risk is inherent in everything. I mean, boy, I don't watch them, but a friend who watches the home improvement shows, I wish I had a better looking house. Obviously, I don't watch the home improvement shows. Look at this place. But those who do tell me that they keep hearing a couple of things, parents that are saying that seems like it's a normal desire right now. There's parents saying, I don't want any walls in I want to be able to have a clear sight line to my kids at all times. It's like, those poor kids, sometimes you just want to get away from your mom and sneak the comic book,
Well, it's like social media, right? The kids have discovered that parents are always watching what they're doing because social media is risky. And let's face it, there is risk in anything that happens online.
In everything.
But the kids.
But there's also risk in not doing it and being the only one who doesn't have a way of communicating and planning. But I wanted to say the idea of risk and risky. And so the parents want to get rid of the sight, any blocks to the sight lines. And then a lot of times, and I haven't seen these, so this is hearsay, they don't want a house with stairs. And what's interesting about that is that, of course, they're afraid of their kids falling down the stairs. How do you learn not to fall down the stairs? You gotta climb some stairs. Stairs are not like a weird part of life that you can avoid, like oysters, or escargot or something. It's like, why I'm only thinking about shelled fish. I don't know, but the point is that stairs, like the actual contours of the earth, are sort of like stairs. There are hills, there are mountains, there are valleys, there are streams, there are rocks, there are trees. The idea that you should have a completely flat, no stairs, no blockades between you and the child ever is like setting a prison. I mean, you're trying to create a panopticon where you see the child all the time, you can be in control all the time, and parents are unashamedly asking for that on these home improvement shows, which I feel is why we feel so scared as parents. If this is the norm to the point where it's like houses are being built to accommodate these parents, then you start feeling like it is normal to worry about your kid walking up and down the stairs, walking out the door, ever riding a bike, doing anything on their own. And that just keeps reinforcing the idea that you should be always seeing, all knowing and hovering, which then leads to you doing that and leads to the things you were talking about before, the depression, the anxiety. So there's no risk, because if you're taking out the risk of climbing the stairs, you're instilling the risk of like stairs, which you don't want either.
There's a difference though between accepting that there is risk inherent in life and actively pursuing risky things.
Yeah, risky things, yuck, frankly. I'm just I believe in, put on your seatbelt. Seatbelt does not change your experience at all, right? You're still in the car, going where you're going, getting there at the exact same time. Put on a helmet. You still get to ride your bike. Put on a mouth guard. You'll keep all your teeth while you're playing soccer, rugby, football, whatever. But those are risks that can be mitigated. And I'd say that certainly in the case of a car, they're real risks. The number one way kids die is as car passengers. But to rewrite using a sharp knife as a risk, because there is a teeny tiny risk, not even a teeny tiny risk, there's a somewhat risk that you might nick yourself. But I keep wanting to do a video, and nobody wants to do this with me, where it shows like, you're worried about your kid chopping off their finger. Let's see how much it takes. And I'm not willing to do this video, but I think it would take a lot of chopping, with a serrated knife that you're using for your cucumbers to actually chop off that finger. And so to call that risky when it's simply a risk, and in the meantime, your kids are getting adept at making a meal, being confident, being trusted, being part of the economy of the house as opposed to just the king, I think that you can't say that that's only a risk. there's a risk in not letting your kid use a knife.
In a recent podcast, and by the way, so Let Grow you've got a brand new podcast that you've been doing, and I'm already caught up on it. The name of the podcast is
Supervision Not Required.
Love this. And in one of your more recent episodes, you said, and I quote, "Fear doesn't prevent death, but life."
Yeah, it prevents life. Yeah, and I wish I could take credit for it, but it's probably from a fortune cookie or something. I mean, I heard it elsewhere, but it's so true. I mean, sometimes it feels like worrying is a substitute for doing or for anything else. It's like, oh, I'm doing something great, I'm worried. And believe me, I'm a worrier, so I know that that's a major time suck and also a joy suck. But worrying doesn't change things. Yeah, if you're gonna worry about your kids, and you are, teach them the things that we've just been talking about. Teach them to cross the street safely. Teach them that they can talk to strangers. They can't go off with strangers. Teach them never to get into anybody's car. Teach them to look both ways. Actually, 3 times when you're at the corner, you're supposed to look left, right, left again. I don't remember why, but I learned it in kindergarten, and then I just read it again recently, so it must be true. Teach them the things that parents have always taught their kids about life. But until recently, it wasn't that we assumed that we were going to be with them every second. And in the way they don't even have to learn anything because we're always going to be with them or watching them. And that's it. Assume that it's safer for your kids to gain some independence and to have some, not horrible experiences, but a couple of, things that were thwarted, some disappointment, some frustration. My kid got a trophy for 8th place in bowling out of 9 leagues. I'm insulted on his behalf. Are you thinking that he can't tell that, he's second to last out of 9 teams? I mean, he can handle the frustration. And if he wants to get good at bowling, well, now he knows he's got a long way to go. So he can either practice or accept the fact. But the idea of pretending like there should be no frustration ever and you still got a trophy, that's an insult to the human spirit.
I have a couple of questions before I get to my final 5 that we whiz through very quickly to learn a bit more about.
Oh, God, I know you sent me the final 5 before, and I don't know the answer, so we'll probably actually have to creep through them very slowly as I second guess myself. But go on.
We'll see how we go. So a couple of quick ones just to try to, I guess, distill and break down into really simple steps what we're dealing with when it comes to this idea of letting our kids grow. Letgrow.org, of free range parenting our kids. In that podcast that just made me laugh out loud, you used the line, "We want to give our kids freedom." And then you said, not so much freedom that they're hitchhiking to the crack house, but we want to give them freedom. So how do parents who are really wrestling with some of the things that we've talked about today identify, where do they start? How do they get to the point where they say, okay, I will let my child walk or ride to school, or I will give them this freedom in this way or that way? How do they do that? I know that Let Grow's got some resources to help with this, but what guidance would you give?
First I do have to put in a plug for our Let Grow project because it's free. And so is the Let Grow Independence Kit. Pretty much everything that we do is free. And the reason I'm mentioning it is because it is very hard to be the only parent who is doing something that goes a little bit against the grain. If nobody is letting their kid ride their bike, more than 2 blocks, and you say, I think you can go all the way to the drugstore, or whatever, not the drugstore, the pharmacy, the candy store, whatever. Oh my God, candy. If you're saying that your kid can do something and other parents aren't, it is harder to do. And so when schools do the Let Grow project, where all the teachers are sending all the kids home with the assignment they have to do something on their own, then you're not the only one. And in fact, then your kid and your neighbor's kid can go together to the park or together to the store. So the reason I recommend the Let Grow project and its corollary for distance learning time, the Let Grow Independence Kit, is because you don't feel alone. And that is a much easier way to go because you are changing the norms together, right? We've heard from towns that have done this project that afterwards, like the principal went around 2 weeks after her school had done the Let Grow project, and she saw 2 kids on bikes, a kid on a roller skate and a kid on skateboard in just her little ride home. And she said she'd never seen kids outside on their own before. So it changes the norms. It's much easier to be brave when everybody else is being brave to the point where it doesn't even feel brave anymore. It just feels normal, just like we were talking about at the beginning of this our discussion, when your mother would let you walk home at age 7 and get yourself a snack and walk back to school, she didn't have to be Evel Knievel brave. She was just part of the norm, and so were you. So it's easier when you do it together. But I would say this, if you want to do it with a friend. You don't have to do it with the entire school. Send your kids to do something together without you. And the thing that is so reinforcing and makes it so easy is the first time you do it. Because the first time you do it and your kid comes home and they walk through the door and they've taken the subway or they got you the milk. There's that great commercial that you guys have, I think either New Zealand or Australia, about the kid who goes and gets the milk for the first time. Or when they've done anything on their own and they come in and they're so proud, you will be out of your mind with pride and giddy. And that's reinforcing to yourself. This just delicious feeling of seeing your kid blossoming really helps you take the next step. Really, the first time is hard. And after that, it just keeps getting better because it feels normal and you're proud.
So we're obviously a quick reminder, this needs to be developmentally appropriate. We're not suggesting that we let the 2-year-old go and collect the milk on their own, or even the 4-year-old. They need to be big enough to handle themselves in a reasonable fashion, but we can just ease off on the pressure.
Wait, actually, I'm sorry. I should have jumped in 1 second and said, do the things that we were talking about before too. If you're sending your kid off, you'll feel better if you teach them how to cross the street and you walk across with a couple times and then you say, when would you go? And you say, yes, that's right. And then you let them do it. Once you see that your kids are not, they're not kittens, they're humans, and they will get some information into them and absorb it. That will give you a lot more calm too. Yeah,
the practice runs and the appropriate scaffolding are necessary so that you can see that your child does have the developmental capacity to pull this off on their own. Last question for you before we dive into these 5. How can we promote free-range parenting during a pandemic?
Well, this independence kit that I'm recommending, the Let Grow Independence Kit, is the same thing. I mean, there's certainly a lot of things that they can still do by themselves. They can go outside. If you pod with certain, people who you trust in terms of them keeping themselves quarantined to the same degree as you, then they can play together, right? They can still be outside. They can be drawing. They can be making dinner for you. They can be in charge of their own homework. They can be finding new interests. You can give them freedom sometimes to play video games and, not worry so much about that. You just
imagine that.
Imagine that. The thing is that when they're home and when you're home, there's just too many hours in the day to entertain or educate them yourself the whole time. So I'd say, we just did a giant survey of 1,600 kids and 1,600 adults in the States here. And we asked the kids, what are you learning anything new just for fun, not for school, just on your own? And the answers were just outrageously charming. I'm learning about fuses. I'm braiding hair. I'm studying gangsters. I learned that my sister has a boyfriend. There were just all these interesting things that once they were bored, you don't have to cure their boredom all the time because they will migrate to something that interests them. And when they do, that's education. If they're studying everything about cars or everything about worms, reading up on it, watching videos, maybe doing a podcast or whatever fake thing on it, that's education. So everybody who's worried about their kids filling their time and everybody who's worried about are their kids getting enough education, when they find something that turns them on and they pursue it, that's focus, that's research, that's frustration tolerance, because you got to learn how to do it better and better and better. And that's education. So don't be so concerned about the schooling maybe going down a little bit.
Yeah, so good. Okay, thank you. So 5 questions to wrap up. Every single person on this podcast gets the 5 questions. And the first one...
there's technical difficulties. Oh, no.
Rapid fire, really easy. If we asked your 2 boys, now aged 22 and 24, what their favourite thing to do with you is, what would they say?
Lick the bowl. I make a lot of brownies. They still fight over who gets the ball when they're around.
The brownies and the beater. I have the same issue when I go back to mum and dad's as well. What's been your trickiest parenting moment?
Every parenting moment. Can I just go with that? Everything about the car. We discussed this before. Do you have to drive in the rain? I literally didn't want my son, the 22-year-old, to drive back up to college in the rain. I was overruled, and I'm really glad I was overruled by husband and son saying, "Are you kidding? Aren't you the free range mom?" That always works.
I love that you struggle with it just like anyone else with your issues. You know, everyone's got their triggers, and for you, that's the thing. And I just love the fact that you're actually struggling with it. Question number 3. If you could spend an hour with your boys at any age at all, let's say, you know, tomorrow afternoon they wander into the living room, it's 3:00, and they're at that magical age that you're envisioning right now, what age would you pick and why would you pick that age?
Okay, I'm going to say I'm going to pick like this weekend because when they were visiting us, the both of them together, which I really see, especially during COVID. And I'm saying that in part because I think nostalgia is my bête noire. And if I start wallowing in, like, I can't even look. I mean, this is like me being crazy. I hate looking at pictures of when they were like 6 and 8. It just makes me so sad because I will never see that moment again. And I don't think I'm the only one. I would like to hear from your listeners, viewers, or whatever. I think there's something too painful about nostalgia. So I'm just going to say, I wish it was yesterday. We took a funny picture in front of, we bought a lousy new car. I mean, it runs, but it's really ugly. And we took a picture in front of the car.
Okay, interesting. Well, even if life is great right now and you're so happy to be in the moment.
Did I say life was great? I said I don't want to wallow in the past. Let it seem too golden compared to now. So,
thank you for the correction. Let me say that a different way.
Okay.
Even if you could be really happy right now and say that this is what you want to focus on, what are you looking forward to as a mum?
You should realize, like, the crazy person you're talking to. Am I looking forward to anything? I look forward to one of the sons is coming back to visit us again on Wednesday. You know, I really, you know, people think that I'm this daredevil and this non-worrier. If I imagine them getting married, I shut myself down and say, you know, don't jinx it. So I'm just looking forward to, let's say Wednesday. Tonight is Sunday for the record. I'm looking forward to Wednesday.
Okay.
That far.
Okay.
Oh, wait, tonight's Monday. I'm looking forward to 2 days from now.
Yeah, sure. Well, you never know what might happen. They say that we teach the most what we need to learn, or we teach best what we most need to learn.
Oh, that's so funny. Oh, that's so interesting. I always heard we hate most in others what we hate most in ourselves. It's like, why is she so brave? Anyway.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, last question for you. If you could go back to yourself, and now I know that there's no nostalgia in this one. Okay, this is the advice question. If you could go back to you when you were a brand new mum, having one of those really tough moments with your children where things just aren't working out right and you've got no experience of this parenting at all, what advice would you give to yourself if you could go all the way back to the beginning, 20 odd years?
Yeah. I think it would be about perspective. And actually, this is one that I'm stealing from Wendy Mogul, who wrote The Blessing of the Skin Knee. And she said, it's normal to think that other kids are better than yours because you don't see them all the time. And if you look at anything close up, you will see the flaws. And so to not envy my friends when they were having a perfect day with their kids or what looked like a perfect day. And I was like, you know, galumphing along and they were crying and or, you know, hitting each other. It's just good to remember that nobody really has the perfect kid or the perfect answer. And that's reassuring to this day.
Yeah, I think that'll bring a lot of peace to a lot of parents listening to that. Lenore, this has been such a delightful conversation. I've learned lots. I've enjoyed your energy and your passion for free ranging. If people want to learn more about you, whether they want to grab your books or they want to get hold of the resources you've talked about, what's the best way for them to do that? What would you like people to know more than anything right now so that they could get more info?
Oh, so first of all, come to letgrow.org. Oh my God, we have so many articles, we have printables, we have videos. If you want to talk to your fellow parents who are sort of working their way through this, we're on Facebook at both Let Grow, easy enough, letgrow.org, I guess. Or we also have a page called No More Helicopter Parenting. And believe me, I don't blame helicopter parents because, as you heard, I'm part helicopter. And so it was just for SEO purposes to make it easy to find with search engines. But at No More Helicopter Parenting, it's just parents asking each other questions. I can't get my kid off the couch. You know, I'm worried about, you know, something terrible happening, you know, can you reassure me? It's just a conversation. And then my book is Free Range Kids, but I just got a contract that I signed last week, which means I better start writing it. to update it. So I'm adding a chapter on anxiety and a chapter on, probably on technology. People are very concerned about that. And then one for schools, for school teachers and administrators.
Well, what a great conversation, diving into the early years of the free-range kids movement with Lenore Skenazy. My name's Dr. Justin Coulson. It's been great to have you with me. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed the podcast. Please join me next time when I speak with Adina Glickman. Adina has been heavily involved in the Stanford Resilience Project and specialises in helping students to become effective, resilient learners.
I think I got to this point in parenting where I just thought, I'm not the boss of you. I'm the parent, and that's different. Who you are is who you decide you are, not who I decide you are. So what you want to do with your energy and what you want to do with your attention and your focus is going to be yours.
That's next on the Parenting in Perspective podcast. I hope you join me for that. If you've enjoyed what you're listening to, could you jump onto Apple Podcasts, scroll down to the bit where it says leave a review and tell us what you think. Tell everyone what you think. It's your reviews and your ratings that help people to discover the podcast and lift its visibility so that other people can find it. In fact, because the visibility has been raised so much thanks to all of your reviews, we've got a whole bunch of people who are looking at sponsoring the show and helping us to create better and better content for you. And if you'd like more information about all of the things that we do to support families to be happier, healthier, better functioning, visit us at happyfamilies.com.au or check out our Facebook page, Dr. Justin Coulson's Happy Families.